Yeah, thank you for asking me to present some of the material. Lots of stuff going on. I recognize some people from the NAVFAC meeting in Annapolis. It was kind of fun to share some of the work there as well. So the two main things that we're working on, one is the ASCE supplement to the 7 standard. So that's on flood loads. And the second one is ASCE 24, which is flood resistant design. So there's 2 documents among several others that have to, that are used for the requirements when people are building in flood hazard areas. Let me share my screen real quick. Let's see if we can get the presentation up there. Go into presenter mode.
I see it.
All right, let me just jump back a slide. So this is the work that we're trying to do here. So ASCE 722 came out, and that document is going up to the IBC. So these are standards down below. They get adopted into codes, and then the codes go into the regulations as they get adopted by the local jurisdictions. So we missed the boat to get into the IBC 24, but we did get officially approved. So now we're at the supplement. So the major changes that we did to the flood loads are now a supplement, and we're working on getting those changes accepted into IBC 2027. And then along with that is aligning the changes in that standard with ongoing work in ASCE 24. And then the goal is to get that document as well adopted into the IBC 2027. And then we continue with work on flood loads that goes into the 28 document that then goes into 2030. So this is just kind of just a simple timeline to see how the work done by ASCE eventually gets up into the IBC. Next slide is on the 7 stuff. So again, that's available. It's excuse me, it's free. You can download it at this website, or just Google ASCE 7 supplement 2, and it'll be the usually first link. And then what we're working on now is a lot of effort, very short timeline for 24. When I say short, it's like less than 12 months. We have to be kind of done with the public process around this time next year. So that gives us about 2 ballots. The ballot measure contains, typically or in this case, 40 or so items. Each item is a suggested change to this document, and then we have to vote on it. The committee, we just met in person last week, and the idea is there were a lot of changes, you could say unfinished business from the previous cycle that had nothing to do with the supplement, had a lot to do with just changes to flood practice, work that's going on in FEMA and other agencies. So the first ballot is just a lot of changes from the previous cycle. And then the second ballot, the ongoing work, is going to be the changes based on the supplement and other new ideas that people have. So it's kind of the process. So we get 2 shots, which is kind of short. I think for ASCE 7 process, usually there can be 10 or more ballots, where you just go back and refine and refine. So we're on a really, really short time frame. The 3, I've given this talk before, but the 3 main changes in the supplement that we made, this is a huge change. It's extending the hazard area from the 100-year region, what we call the special flood hazard area, extending that out to the 500-year flood. So for example, the previous code was if you're in the 100-year, you have to elevate. As soon as you're outside the zone, you don't have to elevate. We took a straw vote last week. I think I can just share this with everybody. Did take a straw vote, the overall 24 committee's impression of extending this out to the 500-year. And I think there was general agreement that this is an effort worth trying to do in the ballot too. So that was good news from my perspective that we're going to go ahead and try to align that. just to give people a general idea, that's this is it's an old slide. It's 20 out to 2015, so it's almost a decade old, but I think the percentage is pretty consistent. There's about 10% of the US population in that combined floodplain, 100 to 5, going out to the 500 year. So it will impact a lot of people, a lot of businesses and so on for new construction. The second big change was elevating buildings based, or not, I shouldn't say elevating buildings. For 7, it's about forces. So it's calculating forces with a change in the hazard level based on the risk category of the structure. So for a higher risk category of structure, like a hospital or a school, you have to use a higher hazard. So 750 and 1,000 for risk category 3 and 4, respectively. So this is also a major change. And there was a lot of discussion about, whether or not we can do this, come up with a procedure for 24 in this short amount of time. But good news is we've had several presentations by FEMA. This is a slide from John Garciola. He presented this at the NIBS meeting, but it's basically talking about the future of flood risk data, the big initiative that FEMA is working on, where they're shifting from, the old way of doing things where you're inside or outside the flood zone to much more of a probabilistic approach. So it's very consistent with what we've already done for the 7 supplement, and including these discussions with 24. So your group might be really interested in this one, just to hear the presentation that FEMA gives on the FFRD. But it's risk, probabilistic approach. It's really nice, and the data is on the fast track to be released. It doesn't have climate change in it. You have to kind of add the climate change on top, but at least it's going from kind of binary in or out of the zone to more of a probabilistic approach. Some of the things that again, this kind of hot off the presses, but trying to align these 2 documents. This is a picture from the Coastal Construction Manual. So it's not in 24, but it's related to 24, these different flood zones, the 100-year still water elevation, the base flood elevation, how high you have to elevate homes. We're introducing this 500-year line as an alternative approach for 24. It hasn't been accepted yet. And the ongoing work now is trying to align, for example, what we're doing in 24 with BFE and freeboard and all that kind of stuff with the 7 approach, risk-based approach, where we've got 100, 500 year, where we add sea level rise and so on. So this is just a schematic of where we're headed with trying to align these 2 different documents. Again, they can coincide with different levels because one is about forces and one is about flood proofing. But I think the general consensus is it's nice to have a way to translate the 2 if they are different, so that people are working at the same risk level. Oh, and then sea level rise. So again, specific to this group, you guys might know already that the 7 supplement we could only get observed sea level rise rates calculated out for 50 years or not less than 50 years. So it's a bit of a compromise, but there is some ongoing discussion about potentially, at least in 7, for the 28 cycle, to use something that's related to the risk category of structure. So for example, higher risk categories would have to do more than just the historic rate of sea level rise. We're not sure whether or not that will get into the 24 supplement in time. I'm a little bit doubtful that we can get all of that done in 2 ballots. And that's kind of where I am at this point, where we are with the committee.
All right, excellent, Dan.
Questions or comments?
Yeah, anybody have any questions? I know I do, but I'll defer.
I have a quick question about accounting for a changing climate. What are the plans for that? Thank you.
For the 24 cycle, for this one, minimal. I think the best, in 2 ballots, it's tough to get the climate change in there, to be honest. Yeah.
But when would it be? Will it be in the future, next cycle maybe? Or
Exactly. Yeah. So this is on a 5-year cycle.
see.
So this would be, and Jennifer's online, but this is the 2024 supplement or 2024. So the next would be 24-29. Is that right, Jennifer?
Yeah, thank you so much. Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Excuse me. This is Dagmar. Can I ask a question?
Sure, Dagmar, go ahead.
So I'm wondering how you calculate say on what time period you calculate your 500-year flood. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that we need to increase the sort of area protected around vulnerable waterways and the ocean, of course, as sea level rises. But the problem that we're having in this non-stationary environment is that you can't define things like a 100-year flood or a 500-year flood any longer. So I'm just wondering what kind of discussions you had around that and how you settled where you did.
Yeah, I think the reality is we're like a decade behind in my opinion, at least, and I think, trying to make positive steps in the right direction. I think the first one is to get, I think to extend the, even with the non-stationary 500 is better than keeping to the 100.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think there's a reality too that 24, I forget the exact statistic, but it's not adopted by a majority of the jurisdictions. It's also a heavy lift just to get it adopted. And so I think that's the other issue too, is trying to get 24 adopted.
So it's baby steps.
Positive steps. Yeah, I think that's the goal. If we make something that's too stringent, then it will continue to not be adopted.
Yeah. Well, 500 years will seem like it's very stringent. It just isn't adaptable, right? I mean, if you're talking about 500 based on past conditions, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a great point. I think it's a good point. I think let's say the linear approach, the added on approach is, start with a 500-year and then just add a number on top of it. That's kind of the where we are. What number you would add on top to the elevation, I think that's definitely going to be debated. That's why I don't think we're going to get it in very easily in this first round. I think the footprint, though, I think is just a huge issue. I think sticking with the special flood hazard area only creates the so-called waterfall effect, where we aren't doing, I think, what we need to outside the 100-year flood.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Then I've got Ben and then Joe, and we've got 3 or 4 minutes. So,
yeah, thanks. Thanks for the presentation, Dan. My question may have already been addressed, but my question was basically, even if there isn't time to explicitly incorporate future climate change and sea level rise scenarios, how does the knowledge that this body of science exists, and that we do have future projections of flood risk and sea level rise and precip change, how does that knowledge influence, say, the push for greater use of the 500-year floodplain?
Yeah, I think it definitely helps because there's a public process where the public weighs in and, going into the IBC. So I think that's a huge opportunity for people to come forward and say, we need this. I think the people on the committee are like, we need this. And then there's the pushback. So I think there's 2 opportunities. One is for the standard, for the public to comment on the standard. And then after the standard gets accepted, there's another opportunity for going into the adoption into IBC. So I think those are the 2 places where the research community, the practitioner community, that's where they can come in and say, yep, we really need this. But I think on the committee work, I think we've had experts come in, and we'll continue to bring in experts to just even help tell the committee, like, yep, this is, and just so everybody, I think everybody's already aware, it's like oftentimes we hear this, well, I just need a number. I think it's not just a number. They want a good number, but the reality is they do need a number for their sites when they do the work. But I think and Jennifer, I invite you to comment as well, but I think those are kind of the two main people from outside the committee. That's probably the two biggest parts where we can push this.
Yeah, and I think I was going to comment to Dagmar's comment as well. I mean, it is a balance of what the committee can put in a standard. Dan and his committee kind of had to pull back quite a little bit. Actually, they couldn't get, he said that in his presentation, couldn't get as much as they wanted, even through the main committee of ASCE 7, relative sea level rise change. So you can do what you can in the committee process, but at the end of the day, it needs to be accepted by the jurisdiction and the community. And we have a lot of work to do to get it into the regulatory environment through the IBC. So that is a big heavy lift, and it is true and real that the non-stationarity does affect how we talk about the 100-year or 500-year boundary. If you want to think about it that way, that is very true. But we also have to use the documents and the regulatory vehicles that are available to us and available to communities. And right now, those are the maps, and that's what we can use. And so if we want to push the communities and the regulators to a little bit higher standard, the vehicles are these standards and through the building codes. And when you get into that arena, it's not just a technical discussion. It's a policy discussion at that point. What are we going to adopt? What can we tolerate? What can we not tolerate? Because the picture that Dan showed you, is going to capture a lot of more buildings. It's going to capture a lot of more area. And so this will impact how communities, when they adopt it, if they adopt it, not everybody does, but it will impact how they plan, how they build, what things cost, things like that. So we can go as fast as we can, but no faster. And that's really what the hard part is, because we would like to go, Dan and his committee for sure, a lot faster. But this is the environment that we're in. And so we can bring everybody along. If we go too fast, we lose them and they just don't adopt the document. So that's the needle we try to thread.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer. Joe, last question. But then the transition to my presentation will be very, it'll just be a continuation of the same discussion, I think. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, and basically was going to comment on, starting with what Dagmar was saying, that, the language you're using of annual exceedance probabilities, of course, is adaptable to a changing climate, right? So that was what we were struggling with, or dealing with in the workshops and such.
Yeah.
You can have a changing, the return level at 1%, the 1% level changes with time. My question was, so right now you have a sort of a probabilistic approach, and that you have a 1% and a 0.2%, the 100-year and the 500-year lines. How do you deal with the stuff in between now that you're dealing with these sort of maps of probabilities? Like if you're somewhere in between the 1%, you have a percentage, you have a annual exceedance probability. So how are you proposing to deal with those in between areas? Or maybe I didn't understand your transect diagram.
Yeah. So there's no in between. It's just, are you in this footprint or not? If you're in the footprint, then you have to follow these documents.
Now it is. But I mean, what are you proposing to deal with the probabilistic approach? You have a map, and now it says you're in the 0.07. But I mean the 0.7.
The FEMA. He's talking about the FEMA maps. That's what you're saying. I see.
Yeah, I mean, if you're moving to a probabilistic, right now you have a probabilistic approach, but you only have two lines, and you're just interacting with it. And now you have
that's a good point. I think definitely not in this cycle. You know, let's say, for example, I think the idea is, can we at least just get out to the 500? I think that's really the goal, to incorporate the new construction and major improvements. And then I think where we're going to see most of the probabilistic work is tying the flood level to the risk category of structure and meeting the reliability targets in Chapter 2 of ASCE 7.
Because I mean, you're mentioning about the additive method, where you're just where you're just adding on some sort of secular
Sea level rise.
sea level rise. You know, that is really I mean, I'm not sure if it's linear, but that's sort of the way you have to do it, because otherwise pretty soon you're going to be exceeding the infinite, return period, right? Same with temperature, right? If a 3-degree warming puts you out of the realm of anything that's happened before. And so that's the concern, right?
Right. And I think the 7 document already has an appetite for risk-based design. You know, if we look in other chapters, it's there. 24 is actually, there's, let's say, a step back with adding freeboard. So add a foot, add 2 foot. Well, 1 foot in Mississippi is not the same as 1 foot in Connecticut. And so I think that's the other thing, is there's no risk basis for just add a foot. It doesn't take into account where we are in the United States. So that, I think, is going to be a big lift to go from, let's say, the old freeboard concept where you just add a foot or add 2 feet, to something where you're adding a number because it reduces your risk. So that's going to be a tough sell for 24. 7, it was tough, but I think 24 is going to be harder, just because they're not used to it. So we'll see.
All right, excellent. All right, thank you, Dan.
Thank you.